such as hardening of the arteries, hypertension, loss of near-point vision, difference in hearing thresholds, none of this. In fact, and they had the highest number of centenarians, people living to ripe old ages in the hundreds with sharp faculties. Now, if you don't think that should be enough to challenge every notion of what we have in physiology, what more do we need? But it was observed and written up as an anomaly. Anomaly means it doesn't fit in with what we know about how things should be. So you discard it. When in the anomaly itself is the precise mechanics of something very fascinating.
This is the end of side A. Fast forward your tape until it stops. Turn it over to listen to side B.
In 1985, Dr. Ellen Langer, who's a Harvard psychologist, did another study, which was very fascinating also. In the Boston Globe, she advertised that she wanted 100 people over the age of 80 for an experiment that she was going to do over 10 days. And she took these 100 people, all over the age of 80, and she put them in a bus, and she took them to a monastery about 25 miles outside of Boston. And in the monastery, she created the atmosphere of the 1950s. So everything over there was from the 1950s. There are lots of Life magazine those days, with lots of beautiful pictures, Elvis Presley rock and roll music, and candid camera television. And the movies they watched were Anatomy of a Murder by Alfred Hitchcock, and the newspapers talked about Khrushchev and Fidel Castro, etc., etc. The atmosphere was totally from the 50s. And then she also told them, she said, be as you were when you were in the 50s. Their clothes, their fashions, everything. And the instruction was, don't think about the 50s, be as you were in the 50s. That's all she told them. In another part of the building, she didn't create the environment, nor did she give them that instruction. She said, but reminisce about the 50s. So in two groups, one were being as they were in the 50s, the others were talking about it, the good old days. And what happened, in 3 days she took some pictures, and she showed them to independent evaluators, and she said, look at these pictures. Who's younger? And these people looked, independent evaluators, looked at these pictures 3 days later, and they said, these people look much younger. Are they younger? Because their wrinkles seem to have gone away. They look photographically much younger. At which point, Dr. Ellen Langer got a group of gerontologists and measured about 100 different biological functions that we know correlate with aging, such as hearing threshold, such as near-point vision, such as systolic blood pressure, such as bone density, such as height, such as finger length by X-ray, such as the activity of the immune system, such as heart rate, such as cardiac output. And she found that all 100 had reversed by several years. She brought them back to Boston on a Friday evening, and by Monday they were back where they had started from. Obvious question is, couldn't one do this? Couldn't one create a city of immortals where we have a different perception of aging and a different interpretation? Society has no influence then on us. And of course, the usual response is, society won't let you. They remind you all the time what happens at 40, what happens at 50, get menopause at a certain age, you stop working at a certain age, a social security system that reinforces the idea, old folks' homes that constantly remind people how old they are, this whole business of the collective consciousness and how it influences individual consciousness. Again, goes back to a very ancient thing by another great rishi from India. In fact, this man, Adi Shankara, is the originator of the technique that we practice in transcendental meditation. The holy tradition goes back to Adi Shankara, who said several hundred years ago, he said, the only reason people grow old and age and die is that they see other people growing old and aging and dying. What we see, he said, we become. What we see, we become. Today, science is using some other expressions to describe the same phenomenon. They don't say what we see we become, or what we hear we become, or what we taste and smell and touch we become. All of that is true. They say we are the metabolic end products of our sensory experiences and how we interpret them. But this is exactly what they're talking about. The mechanics of anything, the mechanics of creation is identical, whether it is the mechanics in the human brain or a human physiology or the mechanics of creation of a galaxy. It emerges from that field of silence which is pure consciousness, unbounded, pervasive everywhere. And that pure silence then interacts with its own self, and it creates a sound or sounds. And these sounds then become words with meanings. And these words with meanings are thoughts, fluctuations of energy and information in the whole universe. And then these fluctuations of energy and information literally become the physical matter of the universe. But that's how we are all co-creators in that whole mechanics. In your scripture, you read the expression, first there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was made into flesh. It's a very literal expression from the scientific point of view. I mentioned that to Maharshi once, and he said, yes, that's true. A little more description we can give it. Before the Word was the sound, and before the sound was silence, the continuum of silence. We go to that continuum of silence, and again I heard this quote this morning from one of the Psalms. Dr. Curtis said, be still and know that I am God. The same expression. In that stillness is the mechanics of creation, and in that stillness, those interpretations which are frequencies of sound, which the Veda calls, the Ayurvedic literature, it calls primordial sounds. The primordial sounds of nature which create everything. And therefore, by going back to that level, we can begin changing the blueprints from which we create both mind and body and perceptual experiences. I won't have time to cover these other factors. I'll just have time to cover one or two here. And one factor which is very important here is the aspect of creativity. The Vedic literature ascribes to the universe three forces: the force of creation, the force of maintenance, and the force of destruction. These forces are symbolized in the expressions Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara. These are basically the three quantum fluctuations that make up all of physical matter. My body is made up of these three fluctuations also. So when you see a body, an atom, what is it? It's these impulses of intelligence information that we call particles that are emerging from that void. That's the force of creation. Then they move around for a little while. That's the force of maintenance. Then they collide, disintegrate, and disappear into the void. That's the force of destruction. These three simultaneously are going on in an eternal continuum of now. If we maximize the force of creation, then obviously that has an effect on the aging process. And I just want to say what Ayurveda and Vedic tradition has to say about the secrets of those creative processes. There's creative people, and this is, I'm talking about people now, but creative phenomena display these same aspects. Creative people have the ability to go into silence, whether they have learnt it through a specific technique or they spontaneously have the ability to experience that solitude which is the core of their being. Solitude is not the same thing as loneliness. Loneliness is separation, fragmentation, alienation. Solitude is in fact unity consciousness. Creative people know how to connect with nature. They feel that they are an aspect of nature itself, themselves. They don't therefore suffer from things like picnic deficiency. Creative people trust their feelings, not their intellect. In fact, Ayurveda says that the whole problem of suffering is the mistake of the intellect.